everybody. Welcome to the NFA event series. My name is Millie Harrod, and I am the membership manager here at the National Flutist Association. If this is your first time attending an NFA event, then I would like to personally welcome you to this flute community. The NFA was founded in 1972 and has since grown to become one of the world's largest flute organizations, with members from all 50 states and countries from across the globe. We invite you to visit our website, nfaonline.org, and learn more about us and how you can be involved. Would also like to acknowledge that today's online event is made possible with the support from our members, our donors, and the Illinois Arts Council Agency. Thank you, and I will hand it over to our presenter.
Well, good afternoon. My name is Elizabeth Potts. I am the flute professor at the University of Tulsa here in Tulsa, Oklahoma. So was really excited when the NFA offered the opportunity to do these kind of mini online presentations outside of the normal NFA convention in August, because I'm not always able to go to that due to various responsibilities here at my job. And one thing I'm really passionate about and have been really heavily involved in is a lot of the local and regional auditions for Allstate, which is a kind of process for middle school and high school students that want to play in a large ensemble outside of their band program. I mean, you've probably heard of the Allstate system and wherever you are located. But specifically here in Oklahoma, one part of that process for every level from 7th grade up through 12th grade, a part of that audition is sight reading. And being behind the panel listening, I noticed the biggest thing was students were not succeeding in sight reading. They were able to play the selected etudes with great ease, with poise, beauty, musicality, all those wonderful things that we want to hear. However, when it came to sight reading, it was not as well prepared. So I thought, okay, what are some things that I can do as a teacher here to help those students? And so through, again, years of being behind the panel and talking with other band directors, other professors at TU and other schools I've been at, one of the things I came up with was kind of this easy 5-point system. My students use it all the time. And sorry, I'm asking Miss Millie if I can share the file with you. So hang on one second.
It should be in the chat. Can everybody see it?
Okay. Here it is as well. So this is a sheet that I include for all of my students, any type of workshop that I use for. And so what I'd like to do is kind of go through that in more detail and then talk more about some behind the scenes steps that kind of goes into this. So the first thing I encourage my students to do when they're looking at a new piece of music, or if they're sight reading for an audition or for the Allstate program, is one, look at the key signature and the time signature. And so when you do that, you have to be careful, especially with key signature, that you don't assume that if it has two flats, you are in B flat major. You have to look at all of the aspects, especially for upper level sight reading. You may not be in the major key. You may actually be in the minor key. So determining the key signature is step one. And after you do that, finger through the scale as quickly as you can. And it's never too late to memorize those scales. You don't have to have your scale sheet right up there. You can absolutely use all your resources. But the better you are at memorizing those scales, the easier this part gets. So once you've determined your key signature, finger through that scale, get your mind in that key. And again, remember, it might not always fit the key signature. So you have to look at all the identifiers. Do you see any sharps leading to a note that could hint at a minor key, or rate, accidentals, that sort of thing? And then the time signature. This helps you identify the beat, not necessarily your pulse, but your beat. So remember, beat is the lower number of the time signature. So for example, 2/4, the 4 equals a quarter note. Quarter note is your beat, and therefore there are 2 quarter notes per measure, 2 beats per measure. However, that may not be your pulse. Your pulse may be a lot faster, so you only feel 1 pulse per measure, or it may be a lot slower and you feel 4. But at first, just figure out the time signature, and this will help in steps 4 and 5. So once you've determined your key, you've fingered through that scale really fast if you are able, and determine your time signature and figured out what equals a beat, scan the music. And kind of first thing I encourage students to do is scan for accidentals. So you're looking for anything that does not fit the key signature. You're looking for articulation markings, especially here in Oklahoma. Those band directors that create the sight reading examples for all state auditions love to throw in multiple types of articulation. So you might have slurs in 4s, slurs in 8s, slur 3, tongue 1, slur 3, slurs in 2s, tongue 2, slur 2, slur 2, tongue 2, all the possible combinations. You're just making a mental note of all of those. You're also noticing all the dynamic markings. Do you have lots of mezzo fortes, fortes to suddenly piano, pianos to suddenly forte? You're noticing where those fall. And then you're also looking for style indications. So what type of articulation is used? Do you see accents? Do you see staccatos, legatos? But all the details. So does the example include a modifier that says andante? Well, okay, what does andante mean? Or does it say allegro or legato or dolce, any type of those words that could enhance the meaning? So you're making a mental note of how to finger those accidentals, how to do that articulation. And you're watching out for those variations in articulations that we mentioned. Style markings are usually at the beginning, but then they can also be throughout. So does it change on you, or is it the same throughout? For the second thing you're kind of scanning for are musical nuggets. I call them musical nuggets, but it's scalar passages that you know, like that's an F major scale. It may start on G and go to A, but it's an F major scale. Or what is that an arpeggio that you see? Does it go up? Does it go down? Different things like that. Scales and thirds are another great one that they use. Repeated ideas in stair-step motion, either up or down. So do you have a group of neighbor tones that go up or that go down? So you're looking for those, again, musical nuggets. And then the more details I find that you can pack into that initial read through, the better. Now, this is number 3 is kind of the most important aspect of this whole list, and that is determining the most difficult measure for you. So I say this is very curtailed to you. It's very individualistic, very specific, because what may look difficult to me will not look difficult to my students, will not look difficult to you, may look completely different to somebody else. But you're finding that most difficult measure for you. And again, it could faster notes, large leaps, hard articulations or articulations that you're not comfortable with, difficult looking rhythms, lots of syncopation, unusual placement of rests, or a lot of accidentals or notes you don't know. That could be double sharps, double flats, the things that really stick out to you. So once you find that measure, or it may end up being more than one measure, but once you find that measure, number 4, you determine your tempo. And determining your tempo is done by how successful you can play that most difficult measure. You found that measure, and you're going to determine your pulse based off of the time signature you determined in step 1. And that pulse will help you stay in a precise kind of state as you go through the rest of it. So you're determining your tempo, and as you start to read or finger through that one measure, put that pulse somewhere. I encourage my students to put it in their big toe or in their foot if you need a little bit more physical. If you don't want to finger along, then you can put it kind of here. It's somewhere where you can physically feel that pulse. And once you find it, don't stop. Keep it going. So that in number 5, with whatever time you have left to continue preparing the sight reading, you've got that tempo and you are counting and you are fingering through those steps to make sure that you can get through the rest of it, or as much as you can. For most of the auditions I've been in, you're allowed about a minute. So steps 1 through 4 should take maybe about 15 seconds, and the remaining time you're able to get through probably the bulk, if not most, of the excerpt itself. Do we have any questions as of yet? I know I kind of went through that very quickly, but I want to make sure we get time to go through some examples together.
Could you make just like your thing a little bit bigger?
Oh, sure.
I just want to make sure people can see.
Oh, sure.
Hopefully it'll help. But yeah, it's in the chat if anybody needs it. Hopefully.
Okay,
yeah, I think that's better. Great.
Okay.
Great.
Okay, so now I have a question for most of you, and I'm going to stop sharing for a minute so I can see all of your wonderful faces. But how many beginners do I have present? Okay, none. Awesome. But how many of you are teachers and you teach beginner students? Okay, so I join you. I love teaching beginners. They're little sponges. They eat this up. They love it. And one of the beginner books that I love using is actually, and I'll include this again in the chat. It's a transcription by Jennifer Clough. She puts a lot of great stuff online for teachers, but it's from the Louis Doris method. And it uses scales to help. She uses it as a warm-up, but you can easily use it for sight reading, and you can use it in 2 different ways. By having your beginners, let me make this as big as I can. So for your beginners, you can pick a familiar key for them. This one does C major as the first and then C minor. You can skip around as need be. But for those very baby beginners, you could easily use the top line for them, and you're playing the bottom. So they get used to hearing kind of a harmonic progression beneath. And as you go through and they progress in their abilities, you can start to switch roles to where you're playing the top and they're playing the bottom, since this one is set up definitely with the top being the easier of the 2 lines. So this is a great one to use as well. Another one that I like to use is the Select Duets by Voxman. It's pretty old. I have a copy that's probably older than I am. Been around for quite some time. But they're the yellow and blue, yellow and orange. This is the first one, and it's actually not as easy as it seems for beginners, but you can make it work for you if you kind of pick and choose your way through it. But how I use this for duets and for sight reading is I always allow at least 5 to 7 minutes at the end of every lesson. And sometimes lessons are only 30 minutes. If you're like me and you go to some schools every once in a while, then you've got to time manage pretty well. But about 5 to 7 minutes at the very end, That way they really get used to using the process. So they're first, in this example, they're looking at the key signature. Well, there's nothing in the key signature. There's no sharps, no flats. Well, let's check to see if we end on C. Yes, that's usually a given that we're in C major. Okay, great. Play through your C major scale for me. Let's get practicing those scales. Second thing, you're in that first step, you're looking at the time signature. Well, it's a C. Do they know that C equals common time? It's another level of learning. Yes, great. Well, what does that mean? There are 4 quarters in a measure. Great. So what does that mean? Well, you're going to be having 4-foot steps or 4 big toe taps per measure. And then you're asking them to check for style markings. So the allegro, the mezzo forte, the slur to tongue to pattern that's kind of prevalent through the whole thing. Do they see any accidentals? Yes, an F sharp. Well, how do we finger F sharp? Great. Does the F sharp stick around the entire time? No. Where does it go back to F natural? So you're kind of helping them go through these steps. And then once you've made it through almost the whole thing, you ask, okay, have you seen a measure that looks the hardest to you? Great. What measure is that? Well, and they point it out to you. And again, it's going to vary student to student. Sometimes you'll have them all pick the same one, but for the most part, they're going to pick different ones. Then you have them figure out their tempo based on how well they can play through that measure or finger and count through that measure. Then they're putting that pulse in their big toe or their foot, and they're going back to the beginning and counting and fingering. The counting and fingering seems very beginner-ish, but being able to count, if you can count it, you can play it. If you can count and finger along, even better, because you're getting that multi-layer process all at the same time. Give them about 30 seconds to do that. So step 5. So you've maybe spent more than the allotted minute per se, but you've covered a lot of ground in a very short amount of time. And then you go back and you play it together. I always have my students play the top, I'll play the bottom. And once we've gotten through the entire book, we'll switch roles. So they will always play the bottom and I will always play the top. The key thing with practicing duets with my students, I always tell them I will not stop. At first, they don't like it. They usually get very flustered if they mess up and, we end up stopping, but I always keep going. And the reason I always keep going is because when you are in the moment sight reading, or if you are in an ensemble playing something for the first time, you can't stop. They won't stop and wait for you to figure out what happened and then jump back in. No, you've got to regroup really quickly, dive right back in, and keep the music going. So the Voxman is a great book that I like to use for that. What about, do I have any intermediate advanced players or teachers that teach intermediate and advanced? Awesome. This is great. So I love the Voxman for middle school, lower level high school students. And again, that varies, but I have some really, really fabulous middle schooler players that play better than some high schoolers, and that's just the way it is. So we have to adapt. But for high schoolers, this is a book that I grew up with, and it actually took me a while to find a copy, but it is still available. It's called Develop Sight Reading, and there's 2 volumes, and all it is a set of quite unusual and unique sight reading examples. So again, once you've gone through them, it's not really beneficial to go back. So this is one where you're really trying to help students prepare for an audition. So again, this is a relatively longer example than what they might see, but the application is still possible. So you have step one, determine that key. Okay, what's common time again? That's how this one starts. But say, let's look at another one. So these first couple, they typically stick with more traditional approaches. Well, number 5, okay, so we get 3, 4. There's nothing in the key signature, so we would play or finger through and play through the C major scale. But if you look all the way through, we end on an A. So this is where the key signature will not always be applicable to the key. So what they know as C major is not the case here. So that goes to helping students, even in younger stages of their learning, really know their major and their minor scales. So this one's an A minor. So helping them finger through the A minor scale. Even 1 octave is great, just getting the mind in the key. Determining our time signature, 3, 4. So we have 3 beats per minute, or per measure, excuse me, not 4. Scanning through some tricky measures that I see. This one right here, 3rd line, 1st measure, just because of the syncopation into beat 2, and then the 16th note into beat 1. If they have difficulty with triplets versus duple 2 bars later, that might be what they come across. But then the next 2 measures, lots more syncopation, especially in that 5th measure of the 3rd line, where you're coming off of the C tie to a B flat on the and of beat 1, and then an F on the and of beat 2, and then into the even lower register, that low C. So lots of options here for finding that difficult measure. But once they've picked one, have them, again, determine that tempo. That's the big thing. Get that tempo that they can play what is hardest looking to them in their mind. And then put it in a physical timekeeper. So foot, big toe, anything like that. And then go back to the beginning. These examples don't have as much as far as style identifiers, such as articulation, like staccato or legato. It does have a lot of articulation and some dynamic markings, but I find that this particular book really hones in on the rhythmic complexities and also the pitch complexities of it as well. So what I'd like to propose, if you have your flute, or if you want to sing or hum, I was going to pick one example and give you about 90 seconds to look through it and trying this kind of 5-step process. So again, determining, first one, determine your key and your time signature, your meter. And then you're scanning for all of the details. So all the fun things. And then 3, determining the most difficult measure so you can determine your tempo, determining your tempo, and then going back and kind of working through it with the time remaining. So if you would like, let's pick, this one looks fun. So number 4. And feel free, I will start, I've got handy dandy timer here. And we will try it and see how it goes. Okay, go for it. Okay, so we've had 30 seconds. So hopefully you've had a chance to kind of do at least the first 3 steps, and then hopefully getting that tempo in your mind. Okay, so that was 1 minute. I want to give you a chance, if you would like, to play through it. To see how you do. Go for it. Okay, so how did we do? Better or worse than expected? Hopefully better. Miss Alice, I saw you working real hard. How did it go?
Well, it's hard to see.
Oh, I apologize. So, let me. Okay. I just
Alice,
stuck it in, I just put it in the chat for you. So you're welcome to pull it up on your own. So I
also,
apologize for being so
it might
small.
help everybody if you're on speaker view, because then it'll make it bigger. I'm not sure what your settings are, but yeah.
Okay. So there was a question. It was, um, let me- so Develop Sight Reading is by Charles Collin. He was out of New York at the time. Let me, I will make that. So there's his information. But again, it's a fairly old book. It was first put together in the 50s. But it's, to me, it's one of the better books because of the complexity of the rhythms and the pitch notation. Is it any bigger for you, Miss Alice?
I don't know yet.
Okay.
Don't worry about it.
Okay.
So how would I see the music? They put it in chat.
So okay. So Michael, I apologize if I mispronounce your last name, Treister. You said your orchestra sight reading practice includes checking to make sure I have all the pages. And then pencil markings, key changes, yes. Repeat points and railroad tracks, yes. So when you're using sight reading as far as for large ensemble or in an ensemble setting, yes, those are definitely things to look out for and to encourage students to look out for. From my experience, As far as sight reading for audition purposes, I haven't run across examples long enough to include anything except a repeat. So my experience is coming from that per se, but definitely there are those that are longer for different things, especially again in a large ensemble where you would have pencil markings for key changes. And then again, like you said, the repeat points, or even different, I call them musical roadmaps. So if there's a DC Alphine or to a sign or to a coda, so making sure students understand that as well. Definitely a good point. Some other things that I find are beneficial for everyone, especially students though, in this kind of situation, is to use, I have them use this approach for when they're practicing. If they are learning an etude, the first thing they do when they get a new etude is they have to determine the primary key area. A lot of my students are in Anderson 15, 33, and 41. So finding the key area can sometimes be tricky as you're going through it. But to understand the key area they're in, to understand the time signature, so their metric applications. And then they have to determine a metronomic tempo as they're going through their etude. Even from day one, they use a metronome. It's not learning notes and rhythms and then applying a metronome. How do you know if your rhythm is correct if you have nothing to base it against? So that's again, those types of things from in all practical applications. So determining a tempo that you can play most likely the entire etude. You might have to make adjustments for other things that you come across, difficult fingerings and such. But the more comfortable you get with practicing the approach, the easier it gets. And then, like I mentioned before, duets are a great way to incorporate sight reading. And if you do it in a lesson, it's kind of a part of the lesson. A lot of my students, that's their favorite part of their lesson, is getting to the end to the sight reading. Because they don't see it as sight reading. They see it as getting to play with their teacher. And so finding ones that are great. So these are the two Voxmen that I use for middle school and high school, volumes 1 and 2. Volume 2, they're a bit longer. They're not necessarily more technical, but they are longer in length. And another book that a lot of, at least in Oklahoma, middle schoolers will have is the Rubik Advanced Method. And in the back, kind of the middle and towards the back, are lots of duets. Some of them you have to be careful if they're being used for all state auditions, but if they are, have them read the lower part. Because a lot of times the all state audition will only be the upper part, not the bottom. So have them practice the bottom. And this is a true kind of easy book for beginners. So the Bellwind Master Duet. And so here's somewhat of a first, this is the first one. So relatively simple rhythms, quarter notes, half notes, not too difficult as far as articulation, lots of slurring to work on finger coordination, and a few accidentals, but it's going between two that students most likely know at this point, nothing outlandish. And then they sometimes are like traditional songs. So depending on where you are in the country, you might come across a kid who actually knows the melody from one of them. But for the most part, they're relatively unknown. They also, as you're going through them, you can talk about what different titles are. So what is a minuet? Or this one, what is a rondo? So you're not just covering the aspect of sight reading, you're covering lots of musical aspects at once. And so again, there's that book cover. For your more advanced students, this is a book that is pretty popular down here in the South. The classic duets, compiled by Mary Karen Clardy out of North Texas. She takes famous pieces, a lot of them from opera, which is a great exposure to students. So the first example here is from Xerxes by Handel. That's for 2 flutes. And the parts are pretty equal. So you could, as a teacher, start with your students playing only the top parts and you play the bottom and then you switch, or you could have them play the bottom, you play the top and switch. This book in particular does a pretty good job of making them equal. And again, that's the classic duets from Clardy. And I think this is more of an advanced just because of the amount of reading you have to do at once. 2 additional kind of intermediate beginner books. This is by Zingara. It's arrangements by him, and it's just for 2. They're shorter, not always for 2 flutes, but this particular book is. But he did write some for flute and clarinet, but they're shorter. So if you don't have a whole bunch of time remaining, you can easily get through a bunch of these. Again, there's that title, just for 2. And then another one is the Flute Duet Album by Milbourne Carey. These are kind of more for beginner, but they are 1 page, and these do have some so there's some pretty well-known tunes. So again, you might have a student that really likes kind of traditional folklore, folk tunes. They might know those. And so there was a question raised when scanning, determine what to do with impossible notes, yes, such as the low A. So when you come across a note that is not playable, so in that one example was the low A, you can encourage students, this is what I suggest, is that they play up the octave. So play the next A that they could play. So not necessarily a different pitch, the same pitch, but just in an octave that is playable. So now for my college students, I actually don't use duets that are on the same page. This is another layer of sight reading comprehension. I love using the Telemon duets. Those are great. Kohler also wrote various volumes of flute duets at various levels, but for, again, my college students, they're not on the same staff. So it really is a study in independence. But it's also a challenge for me because I have to be able to know, wait, something's not right. We're not together. And we have to figure out where to go back and get right back on. Whereas if you're reading 2 lines at the same time, simultaneously, you as a teacher can find, hey, they skipped ahead. Let's go back, figure out what happened. Or, if you want to take the approach of I'm not going to stop, then you keep going, but you know where they're going to end up early or behind, that sort of thing. It really varies student to student. So you as their teacher are going to be their greatest resource. Again, my big undertaking for this was just trying to help students in that intense 30-second situation in a room by themselves with a panel behind a sheet, listening to them. What are some tools I could give them to help them really get a good sight reading across? And again, I found that the biggest difference maker was having that set tempo. Well, every student's different. You can't just tell them to beat 60 beats per minute. What does that mean? Well, no, it's okay, finding that measure that's difficult for them, the most difficult, and determining that tempo, then putting that tempo into practice with the rest of the example, and then being able to then play that confidently. It does take a little bit of getting used to. I will say some students catch on faster than others, but for the most part, as simple as it may seem and sound, I find that it has helped most, if not all of my students, and then some others. Some last minute thoughts before I open up for questions or comments or anything like that. The more comfortable a student or you are with fundamentals, myself included, that's a part of my daily practice, our fundamentals. So knowing all my scales, major, minor, all three forms of minor, scales and thirds is a great one. Lots of arpeggiation, and then rhythms, being really fluent and comfortable with all types of rhythms. There are tons of method books out there. I personally grew up with Tafnil Gobert, with Moïse, with Kujala. May he rest in peace. I miss him. But his body make him by incorporating all that scale work. But then I loved it during COVID. Paul Edmund Davies was so helpful in posting all these different exercises for free. I'm not sure all of them are free anymore, but I know he does have access and through his website to all the resources, but he's very great at incorporating different breathing and phrasing, articulation, practice, finger work. So the more students work on kind of those fundamental things and the more comfortable they are at seeing those in examples, the easier sight reading gets as well. And then the last thing, like I mentioned, when my students are learning new etudes or new pieces, they're doing what I call multitasked learning. It's not learning pitches first or rhythms first and then putting them together and then adding articulation and then adding in dynamics. It's doing it all at once. So yes, the work may be slower and a little bit more tedious, but it's the fact that they are practicing the amount of air they need to take in to make this phrase in this, with the correct notes, with the rhythms, with the slurring or articulation, with the right volume, in the right style, all at once. And they're marking things a lot more as they go. I have the saying, mark more so you miss less. A lot of my books probably look illegible to my students, but it's the fact that I know I will not miss it because I've marked it. But that multitask learning will help in the sight reading process as well, because they're not used to doing one layer at a time. They're used to doing all the layers at once. Yes, again, at maybe a slower pace, but still more comprehensive than trying to add it in at the last minute. Because sometimes you will find that the air you take in will not make it at a forte or a piano dynamic, and you have to relearn that aspect of the example or the piece that you're playing. So I really hope, even in the brevity of this session, it was somewhat helpful. Again, my students really appreciate kind of this 5 basic concept of how to approach sight reading, in that it's succinct, it's not hard to remember, but it does help keep things a little bit smoother in the process, and also something for them to grapple onto, in that, you know, your heart is going to start racing and blood pressure is going to go through the roof. But it's something to kind of grasp onto as, well, this is how I sight read. This is how I know I can get through it. I've done all the back work. I've been practicing with my, duets. And hopefully that will help them as well. So I'd like to open up the floor to questions or comments, anything like that. I do also have, at the very end, I can share, I have a couple websites for, I love books. I still keep a paper planner. I don't trust my phone. yet or my computer. So I prefer, pen and paper books, but there are some good websites out there for students that are a lot more tech savvy than me. So the first one, it's called shedthemusic.com. Let's see. Well, I'll share my desktop. Okay, so this is shedthemusic.com, and it's geared towards a lot of different people and different levels of music, but this is one to really help with rhythm. Again, I believe if you can count it, you can play it. So level one, unsyncopated eighth note rhythms, so quarter notes, eighth notes, and then adding in rests and multiple time signatures. But the one I appreciate the most is when you get to levels 3 and 4, because it starts to talk about compound meters, syncopation, and then especially in level 4, syncopation, 16th notes. So it's getting a lot more detail. And the way it's written, it can be played on any note, it can be counted, it's very open-ended, so it's adjustable to what you need it to be. For sight reading specific, Sight Reading Factory is free for the initial, I believe it's 15 to 20. It basically auto generates random levels. So you can pick your level of difficulty, or you can customize. So if you have a beginner one, if you have a super rock star flutist that needs to be tricked and their brain really tweaked, level 6. But if you customize, you can adjust the rhythms to include any of the following rests, how difficult those rhythms come up, if you have accents, slurs, staccato, syncopated rhythm, ties, dynamics. So all those different options. So there you get to pick your rhythms. You also get to pick your pitches. So this is great for beginners if they only know, say, the F in the staff to, say, B flat above. Oops. And it'll pick things in between. Does it use accidentals? Does it start on tonic? So again, if you have a very basic beginner, you know that they only know a couple sharps and flats, if any sharps, if any flats at this point, so you can customize that. You can also customize your time signature. Do you want to stay in 4/4/2/4, things that they know, or do you want to really branch out? And then it will produce one for you. So I'm just going to do a level 4, pick a random time signature, random key signature. There's 2 options. You can test your skills in real life or practice at your own speed. Either is great, but like here's the first one. And again, it's just auto-generated on its own. And you can have them practice that, or have them practice at their home, because it will play it for them as well, so they can try it and then it plays back for them to see whether they played it correctly or not. And then some other lots of rhythm worksheets. My apologies. Rhythm worksheets. Let's see. Here, this might seem a little odd, but this is actually a piano sight reading book. But again, for beginners, I find that it's great. It's by Schaefer, And he has 3 books. This is the first one. And I like, again, it's whole notes and half notes. So for beginners, it's really great. There's hardly any accidentals at first. Very straightforward. You can work on tone aspects, work on good hand posture, hand position, if they sit or stand, body posture. I'll include that one in the chat as well. But again, this is his first book. The second and the third book are definitely piano in nature. A lot of chordal structures that flutists I'm sure we could attempt to do by singing and playing or things like that. But that book one for the first couple examples is really great for getting beginners getting used to the idea of sight reading through something like that. But there are so many examples out there. I just recently bought for Christmas some Christmas duets. So the Christine Potter one is great. This one, the two duets for two duets. Christmas hits for two. But again, it's I think most important that students get practice and that they have a process of how to practice. To me, that's been the game changer, at least in my studio, is the incorporated practice. And that's been difficult for me in the sense that I'm eating away at time at other things, but we can work on those things in the sight reading as well. So it's like, it's not just figuring out notes and rhythms. No, it's making sure that you're still using that beautiful sound. You're still playing things really well as far as dynamics and style. It's all being incorporated at once, and then it kind of permeates through the rest of their practicing as well. So again, I really appreciate you all spending your Sunday afternoon with me. I love teaching and I love my students here, and I really appreciate you letting me share something that we've been working on together, and I hope that it helps your students as well and is beneficial to everyone. So if there are no other questions, I'll hand the mic back over to Miss Millie.
That was awesome. Can we have like a round of air
Oh,
applause? That was so that was very informative. I wish I would have had you as my sight reading coach in high school. I feel like I would have done a lot. But I did a lot of practicing, but I think having somebody encourage me personally to do it more consistently, I feel like I would have been a lot more successful. So, but also some of the sight readings in Texas were kind of hard, I will say.
I'm from Texas, so like I get it. Like it's like
yeah, the Texas All-State stuff, I was like, that's a really high level anyway. So, but yeah, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. A recording of this event will be published on our YouTube channel in the upcoming week. And we'll try to get all of these like examples and stuff linked on either the YouTube or our website. So, yep, and then our event series continues throughout the rest of the year on Sundays at 2 p.m. and into January and February. If you would like to propose an event, that application will be open here in the next couple of weeks, I think before the year ends for sure. So thank you everybody for joining us, and we hope to see you soon.